Hello everyone, it's Rafael Gutierrez, and today I'm going to talk about something that I've read in a couple blogs, and that is how come kata doesn't look like the bunkai. Now, to really do a good job on that, I'm going to use clips from from different books. A lot of them I haven't, actually most of them I haven't written, and the one thing I will actually say, which is great now, is we do have access to a lot more books than we had before. It used to be that publishers would decide what people wanted to buy and what they didn't. And now people can put out their books, and those of us who are looking for certain books can find it. And there's a lot of books that have been written recently which maybe even 20 years ago they would not be able to have found a publisher. And now they are, and they're coming out with great books. I've mentioned a couple already in different segments, and I'm going to mention a couple more. So with that, I'm going to pause for a little, and I'll be back and talk about what I think. As I said, I do want to talk a little bit about why kata does not look like bunkai. And I want to actually start with this book. I'm just going to read an excerpt on a book by Jerry Fugiani called From the Minds of Masters. And in it, he interviews a gentleman named Tamaki Sensei. Now, I actually met Tamaki Sensei. He's one of my teachers. His picture is in essence of Okinawan Karate Do. He's a gentleman holding a tongfa. And Fugiani Sensei asked Tamaki Sensei, "What was your early training like?" Tamaki Sensei answers, "Before the essence of Okinawan Karate Do was published, training was different. There were variations in the way kata was performed. It was more like the old ways of doing the movements." Now, what's interesting about this is he's telling you that in the past, karate was done different in the same school, Nagamine Sensei school. Different people did the kata different ways, and it was acceptable. Now, today we have a lot of people saying, well, no, you see, I follow so-and-so, and this is the way he does it because that's the way it's always been done. Now, I don't have pictures of every style, but I am going to show you certain books that I think are really important to look at. There's one by Mario McKenna here, an overview of Karate Do, which is a great book. I tend to buy a lot of books, as you can tell. And what it has is it has a lot of different people performing karate. Now, this is a translation of one of the old books. And you can see how different people, if you did Chitaru, you can recognize your founder. You can see how different people did it different. But one of the things they all have in common is they didn't have these long, exaggerated stances that we see in tournaments. And a lot of things have actually changed because of tournaments. People want to make a judge happy because they'll give them a higher score. Now, what's funny is it's not just in that book that we see it. A lot of people will say they follow Funakoshi, Isshin Funakoshi, and this is one of the copies of one of his first books, and they have pictures of him doing karate. And what you notice is it's not the exaggerated stances that we see in the modern tournament circles. So what I'm saying is the katas have changed. And it doesn't matter who you trained under, they've changed. And it probably started earlier on. I mean, if you take the Pinans, they all started with Itosu, and you see all of Itosu's students did the Pinans slightly different. The Pinans were different based on the students. And from what Tamaki Sensei tells us, katas were not necessarily so rigid in the past. And so what we have a change in katas, how they were done, and probably also their application. Now, I am going to show another book. I found a book from Karate Budokan International from Malaysia, and in the 70s, they made this. Like I say, I buy a lot of books. And what you see is, when they're doing katas, with this one's Pinan Yandan, they're not the tournament stances even. And so it should pose a question. Okay, so everyone's changing katas. How is it that all these people have different katas? Why? Part of it could be application. The other part could be why it was changed. So let's, for now, make something. There are people who are going to practice karate for tournaments. And in tournaments, you're looking for what the judge thinks is aesthetically pleasing. It's about doing a kata a certain way because it makes someone happy. And the other way we can look at karate, and it could be, like I said, just two branches of the same thing, is karate as functional. So kata, the way you use the kata has to be functional. And so there are these two different schools. Now, some people will say that by doing it the way tournament judges like, you're showing harder stances, you're showing more athleticism, and that's fine if you're interested in being a competitive athlete. But what if you want your kata only to work? That's it. If it's competitive, doesn't matter, you want a kata that works. Well, then you have to make sure that you do certain things. Now, when I did this book, I actually did use a lot of references. For instance, this is a reference page for the neuro portion. The rest of it has 13 other references on injuries. And one of the big things is this. I wanted to look at a kata and make it work, make sure it worked. And I used my style, which it's not used in tournament. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at this, and I wanted you guys to see what I was doing. So what I'm going to be talking about is this. The kata has to work. It has to work. It has to be paired with an injury that would follow maybe your idea of how you should fight. What I mean by that is this. In my idea of how I would want to fight, I will avoid a fight whenever possible. Reason is I have too much to lose. I'm a professor. If I show up with a black eye to my class, a lot of times people lose respect for me, especially if I'm teaching anatomy. I actually have to maintain a professional image. That means that I'm going to avoid getting into physical interactions. The other thing is I don't know who I'm fighting. If you're getting in a fight, you could be fighting someone who has a knife in their back pocket and doesn't have a problem with sticking you with it if he thinks it's the way he's going to win the fight. For me, I'm going to avoid a fight whenever possible. So if I do get into a fight, it means I need to do something to get out of there as soon as possible. And I don't necessarily want to be rolling around on the floor with someone who may or may not be armed. So if I'm going to fight, I want it to go quick, which means I have to use a concept called ikenhiatsu, which is one move should end the fight. And that's how I'm training. And the way I'm going to figure out if that works for me is by looking at data from the CDC, from the injury reports that they make, and try to reconstruct injuries that I present to the emergency room for my bunkai. So it's going to be a little different. I'm not just trying to punch and, okay, it's just going to hit anything and that's it. I want to make sure that every punch I throw counts, because I don't have time or the desire to see how great or tough I am. I just want to leave. Now, there are some people who like to beat each other up, and if you're just fighting because you like to fight, not a good way to do a bunkai, because that means you're going to kill your friend. This little organ here. This is a model of a brain I have, and I want you to think about this. It weighs about roughly 3 pounds, 4 pounds, and depending on what you actually read, and it takes up anywhere between 25% to 33% of each beat of your heart. So pretty much a third of your cardiac output will end up going to feed your brain. It also doesn't shut off from blood flow too readily. It doesn't do well when it shuts off. And it's really, really interesting in that every part of the brain has a specific function. Now you have people who tell you, oh, you only use 5% of your brain. You actually use all of it. It's just different times you use different areas. Now, every brain has this little slit down here in the middle called a central sulcus. And in front of it, you have the motor cortex. Now, this is what controls you moving your arm or your foot. You have an area here that sends messages, and it goes down your spinal cord from here and ends up causing your arm to move. But you can also pair movements, and so you have to have a primary motor cortex. And you can pair different moves together, so as you move one way, something else happens. You can use it to control your balance, and you can also use it to learn different patterns. So you can end up learning that if you block, you may want to punch and where to punch. And so you do this, and you start learning, okay, if I'm attacked, I block, and as soon as I attack, I punch. Now think about it. Every kata, except for one in some cases, starts with a block. So every kata is telling you, if someone attacks, you block and then counter. It's not the idea of, oh, well, the best defense is a good offense, because let's be honest, if you go walking around in the world thinking the best defense is a great offense, and you're randomly hitting people that you think might attack you, you're going to end up in jail. So the way katas are, they're perfect for modern life in that they actually train your brain to block first and then counter. And you can see how all these work if you go play with your own katas. Now, what this means is your brain is constantly modifying itself to be able to use these techniques as they come out on you. So you have to use the techniques that work, which means if you're saying that in Pinan Shodan, you're coming here, and this here is you're grabbing someone and you're bringing them out here, well, I would actually ask you if that's realistic. For me, it's just here. It's not these big movements, because what we want to do is protect our ribs, and we want to be able to, if I need to, come down here. And so we end up having different moves that we can use. Always look at what you're doing and think about how this is going to work with your concepts of karate. What happens is this. If you have a bunkai and your kata does not look like your bunkai, one of two things has to happen. Either you want to change your bunkai to fit the kata, or you want to change the kata to make sure you practice the bunkai. You're only going to do what you're trained to do. It's a training that gets you to react. And that's one of the things people forget. I mean, there are a lot of stories of martial artists getting attacked and just going into what they need and throwing the person or punching the person. And people ask him, wow, can you teach me what you did? And he said, tell me what I did and I'll teach it to you. But the idea is it's a brain. Actually, all your training, the kata, is in your brain. And so you have to do your kata the way that you're going to use it. If you're using it for competition only, then you're probably not too worried about how it's used in self-defense. If you're worried about self-defense, you don't care how it's going to be used in tournament. So that's what I mean is you have to use your kata for what you intend to be using it for. I intend to use mine for iken hiatsu, the whole idea of one hit should end of attack, and so that's how I'm going to do it. Now, someone else may be interested in tournaments, and that's how they're going to train. I'm not going to say one thing is better or better than the other. It's just different. And so with that, I will